So I think we are very much on time, and it's now a good time to start. It's exactly 10 o'clock. Good morning, everyone. Even though you saw me yesterday, let me introduce me once more again. I'm Mantas Akmokas, an expert working here at Cedefop on the topics of financing and also statistics and analysis. So I hope you have enjoyed the first day of the conference yesterday, as well as cocktail. Maybe you had also a bit of time still to explore in the evening Thessaloniki, the city, or enjoy some local delicacies. And then let me move to today's conference. Today we will move to a bit different topic. Yesterday we focused on individual learning accounts. Today we will focus on another instrument that was already mentioned shortly yesterday, very also important instrument and that we see in quite a few member states, the levy-based training funds. And we will be introducing the findings of another big study of Cedefop that is being completed at this moment and being led by Patrizia, and you will hear more from the other experts involved in the study. And today agenda looks like looks the following. So we have the introduction of the overall findings from the study, firstly. Then the second session will focus on a specific case study of exploring the potential for setting up such a training fund in Latvia, firstly, and then the third session will focus on a similar exploration, but then in that case in Poland. We will break for a half an hour coffee break at 11:50, and after the coffee break, which we hope you will be back sharp at 12:10, we will have the closing session of the conference, a panel discussion looking more towards the future. Then we will have the official closing of the conference by our deputy director here at Cedefop. We'll have lunch, we will have shuttle buses. Now, important once more reminder and announcement, as you have been informed before, we'll have shuttle buses going firstly to the airport right after our formal program has finished, to make sure that those of you who need to catch the plane right away can easily do that with a reliable timely transport that we can provide you. And then after lunch at 14:30, we will have a shuttle bus to the city center, which also for your interest includes a short tour as part of that transfer to see a few of the main sites in the city. So for the after lunch, after conference shuttle, before the lunch, I wanted to ask once more, could you raise the hands who are planning to take the shuttle right after we finish around 1 or 1:10 the conference program? So we know approximately how many of you. Okay, so it's probably something like 20, a bit more than 20 persons. Okay, very good. So the plan is that 13 or 13:10, as soon as we finish, there is a bus waiting for you outside also as yesterday, and you can proceed to the bus, and then it will leave when you catch it. Perfect. So this is clear. A final very important announcement, a reminder again, please do not bring any hot drinks here in the room. The equipment is very sensitive, and if there is an issue, then it's very difficult to recover the losses in case something happens. So with this, I hope you will enjoy the second day of the conference, and then let's move to the first session. And then let me introduce the speakers who will be presenting the overall findings from the study on levy-based training funds. First of all, Patrizia Lipinska, that you have already heard a few times yesterday, an expert here in Cedefop working on financing in particular. And also with her, you will hear from Simon Broek, who is a senior researcher at Occam IPS in the Netherlands. Specifically, he was the project leader of this specific study that he, together with Patrizia, will be presenting for you. And he's also doing some interesting work at the same time on other topics. So, for example, exploring the doing or carrying out a large exploratory study on whether lifelong learning should be a legal task of public funded education institutions in the Netherlands, as an example. But of course, he's doing many more than that. But let's now focus on the training funds. And then let me pass the floor to Patrizia and Simon. And at the same time, I need to put their presentation on. So bear with me a little bit.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us also today on the second day of the conference. I hope you had a good rest after yesterday's long day and extensive discussions, and I'm really looking forward also to today's exchange together with you. We are delighted to share with you the findings of training fund study. Let me start with providing with some basic information about the project. Why did we launch it? While we know, based on the previous research, including Cedefop studies, that training funds play an important role in the...
Is it slow?
Give me a second, please. While we know, based on the previous research, including Cedefop studies, that training funds indeed can play an important role in skills development, there is no explicit role for the training funds, or at least not prominent in the EU policy context on financing, training and financing skills, the context which was outlined already to you yesterday. It has been observed by some stakeholders, and this includes Advisory Committee for Vocational Training in 2021 and Business Europe in 2022, that the widespread practice of training funds across Europe should be given more visibility, more recognition, and support in EU skills policy debates. So therefore, we launched the study in order to gain better understanding of the functioning of training funds across the EU. The study was carried out in 2023 and completed by the end of the last year, and it had two interlinked main objectives. The first one was to provide an overview of the currently existing training funds across the EU, and conduct in-depth analysis of training funds in 8 selected member states, and these were Belgium, Cyprus, Denmark, Spain, France, Ireland, Italy, and the Netherlands. The countries have been selected based on several criteria, and this included the systemic importance of training funds in country CVET system, a balance between countries with training funds that are organized at national and sectoral level, and related to this, the variety in the governance models, and in particular, the role of social partners. Now, the country analysis offers a better understanding of the strengths and the challenges of training funds in the selected member states, and the potential actions that would be needed in order to improve their importance. But importantly, the aim was to provide policy lessons which might be helpful also for the other countries wishing to strengthen their existing training funds or establish new ones. And to this end, the study also developed relevant guidelines for policymakers, social partners, other stakeholders. And the second objective was to explore the potential for establishing a new training funds or significantly modernize, rethink the existing ones. And we carried out the case studies in 2 selected countries, Latvia and Poland, based on country emerging interest in setting up training funds and debates on the topic among policymakers or social partners. These case studies were conducted with the ambition to contribute to designing country-specific guidelines. And here I would like to add that at the time of designing our research, Latvia was foreseen piloting training funds, and Cedefop had the intention to contribute to the process and support the developments in providing evidence how the training funds function, but also to carry out these exploratory research activities in the country. Before having a closer look at the training funds, it should be noted that they are one of the many financing instruments implemented by member states with the aim to increase the provision, participation, and private investment in training. However, among the variety of incentives targeting enterprises, training funds stand out as the instrument reaching the broadest range of enterprises, with around 50% of them reporting of having received support from training funds during the last years. And this reach of 50% is likely to be even higher, as there are examples of training funds distributing resources to companies via tax incentives, and under this category, tax incentive support from training fund would have been reported by some member states. But what is exactly the training fund? In various policy documents and also studies commissioned by international bodies, The term training fund is used to capture different organizations or institutions, and therefore our study provides a new definition tailored mainly to the examples of the relevant institutions which can be found in the EU. So we define training funds as institutions aiming at enhancing EVET or CVET in enterprises and mutualizing the related costs across enterprises. Employers are mandated by law or by collective agreements to contribute financially, typically via a specific training levy or a dedicated surplus to the social security contributions. They are eligible for various forms of support for EVET or CVET, and the collected funds are mainly used for the original purpose, so CVET or EVET, in a closed funding cycle. Business interest organizations or both social partners have a key influence on the ways the collected means are used, and individual employees can be mandated to contribute as well, can be among the beneficiaries, and organizations of their interest can be involved in training fund governance. Now, the study includes also the additional criterion, which is more operational one, that support for CVET needs to be substantial when rated against the backdrop of the available public support for CVET in total. Finally, it should be noted that there are some countries which have the organizations which they call training funds, which, however, are based on the general taxation or social security contributions. And also there is a discretionary decision on the size of the budget to be allocated to these organizations. So while these organizations often provide type of activities which are similar to those which are offered by funds based on the mandatory training specific levy in a closed funding cycle, these are not considered as training funds according to our approach and were not included in the study. What role training funds can play? Based on the literature, the study developed a framework differentiating between four main potential functions of training funds. So the first one concerns putting a beneficial constraint on employers and incentivizing training investment. Training funds indeed can contribute to a better balance of training investment made across companies, and this can be achieved by imposing this training levy, which we call a beneficial constraint, as it discourages free riding of companies that do not train but benefit from training activities of other companies. So the mandatory levy puts a price tag on remaining inactive in the field of training. And secondly, training funds provide various incentives, financial and other forms of support to stimulate investment in training. The second function is generating collective funds for CVET. They may indeed generate additional funding, allowing for exceeding the levels of investment which would be achieved by individuals, companies on their own. Further, training funds are considered as potentially allowing for a more stable long-term funding or CVET, and this is because training levies are collected within this autonomous funding cycle where the funds cannot be used, for example, by public administration for any other purpose than those defined in training fund regulation. Thus, training funds potentially allow for achieving a more sustainable investment in skills as compared to tax-based or social security contribution-based arrangements for public investment in skills formation. Furthermore, training funds may support collective bargaining regarding employee right to training and also employers' obligation to provide training, regarding cost-sharing arrangements, for example, in relation to covering direct costs or to paid working time, and also rewarding employees for acquiring skills and qualifications. For example, training fund can create a cost-sharing arrangement between employers where employers who respond to the individual entitlement of their employees receive a contribution to the incurred costs. Training funds can also introduce and sustain individual and training entitlement, as it is in the case of France that we heard yesterday. And lastly, training funds may become a vital agent in aggregating the often highly specific training needs of employers within a particular socioeconomic sector, and supporting the development of a tailored, high-quality training offers meeting these needs, while respecting at the same time the needs of participating employees. So, in short, training funds may serve as organization governing sector-specific CVET provision. Now, depending on the training fund design, a particular function may be fulfilled to a larger or lesser extent, or might not be among the objectives of training fund at all. The framework that we developed identifies also alternative arrangement for each of the function, which can potentially achieve similar outcome in the absence of the training fund. And thus, for countries where training funds play currently no or only marginal role, the framework can be used to capture the current gaps, the kind of space left for implementing a training fund. And this exercise we conducted in the context of the 2 case studies that I mentioned, Poland and Latvia, and you will hear about it in the next presentations. About the basic characteristic of training funds. Based on the discussion of the potential key functions that I just outlined, it becomes clear that training funds should not be seen only as a financing instrument. Training funds are highly diverse institutions, often developing into complex organizations, and they play a key role in the financing, but also governance, relevance, and the quality of training. They often have a long history in several countries and are important yet highly heterogeneous institutions, and the differences concern many aspects, such as specific objectives, governance models, the level of operation, the number of the funds per country, the way the money is collected, the way the money is contributed, the eligible groups, and the type of training supported. They are usually set up at national level, usually with tripartite governance, so the government and the social partners, or sectoral level with bipartite governance, and the levy defined in each sector based on the collective agreements. However, it should be noted that in Europe we also find other solutions, for example, the training funds in Italy, the so-called interprofessional training funds, where they are linked to a particular subfield of the economy, to the profession or size of the company. And moreover, they are run by social partners over there, but the levy is set at national level, which is a unique solution. So where can we find the training funds in the EU? In line with the definition that is proposed by Cedefop, training funds are established in 13 EU member states. In several countries, namely Belgium, mainly Flanders, Denmark, Cyprus, France, Greece, Ireland, Italy, Netherlands, and Spain, training funds play a key systemic role in the provision of CVET and in particular employer-sponsored training. And these countries have been selected for our in-depth analysis, and the reason was apart from Greece, and the reason for this was that the Greek system was reformed in 2020, and it wasn't very much self-standing alone body, but more integrated, and we waited for the reform to be accomplished. So these countries you have in the dark blue on this mapping, and this grouping includes those countries which opted for creating a single national training fund, or there are multiple sectoral training funds existing. In the other countries, which are in the lighter blue, middle blue, training funds are established only for some selected sectors. So these are Austria, Germany, and Luxembourg, or on voluntary basis, and this is Slovenia. So we can say that they play rather complementary role or specialized role in CVET system. And in the remaining EU countries, training funds based on a specific training levy are not a feature of the skilled formation or adult learning system at all. It should be mentioned, though, that there was also vocational training contribution used to be mandatory in Hungary. However, the system was dismantled in 2022. And as you can see on this slide, many countries which have training funds playing a systemic role, and these ones are marked in yellow, demonstrate high level of training expenditure when we look at 2015 data. And this may indicate that via compulsory levies, training funds generate substantial financial resources and are a powerful tool to accumulate employers' investment in training. And with this, I will hand over to Simon, who will explain to you how the resources may be collected and what kind of form support can be offered via training funds and how they are managed.
Wow. Thanks, Patricia, for this introduction and really kind of shedding a light and providing the context to go a little bit more into depth in the operational characteristics of training funds. And I was the project leader of this project, but we have done it together also with the colleagues from 3S and with Gunther and Daniel as kind of their main counterpart. I just wanted to flag that as well. Training funds across Europe differ widely in purpose, governance, financing and activities, and they operate either at national or sectoral level, often shaped by collective agreements or legal frameworks, and some are tightly integrated into national CVAT or labour market systems, while others function as autonomous, sector-based mechanisms. And to compare them, we distinguish three main clusters. So the first cluster, on the top, are the national level funds embedded in IVAT, CVAT and labour market policies, like in Denmark or Ireland and France and Spain's Fundaya, for instance. They're usually state-governed or tripartite, with public agencies collecting the levies and distributing funds. And the second cluster, cluster B, are single national organizations operating independently but with a broad scope, exemplified by Cyprus HRDA, which not only provides financials training, provide finances for training, but also provides HR support and labor market intelligence. And the last group are groups of sectoral or interprofessional funds, such as Belgium's sector funds or the Dutch O&O funds, or the Italy's interprofessional funds or Spain's construction fund. These are bipartite, jointly managed by employers and trade unions, and offer wide autonomy. And on the slide, you can also see that the contribution or the percentage of the payroll that is paid by employers to kind of support those training funds. And it can range from 0.24% in Greece to 1% in France. And you see also differences. For instance, in France, there is a de minimis regime, so smaller companies have a smaller budget to pay. In Denmark, for instance, there's a fixed amount per employee per year. And what you also can see is that in the sectoral-based training funds, it's obviously varied because it depends on the labor on the agreements within different sectors. So despite this diversity, training funds share a common objective: mobilizing collective resources for continuing vocational education and training and supporting enterprises, especially SMEs, in developing workforce skills. So governance models of training funds fall broadly in three types, as I already a little bit mentioned. So there are state-governed funds with advisory councils to involve social partners. This is, for instance, the case in Ireland. There are tripartite arrangements combining governance, in the governance the government, employers and workers, like in Denmark, France, Spain and Cyprus. And there are bipartite models managed solely by social partners, which is the case in Belgium, Netherlands and Italy. And the governance influences autonomy. Sectoral bipartite funds typically enjoy the most independence, allowing them to tailor support closely to the industry needs. In Belgium and the Netherlands, for instance, governments have no direct role in day-to-day management of the funds, but they can steer activities by providing specific subsidies. And financing mechanisms also vary. The defining feature is the employer's levy, usually a small percentage of the payroll or a fixed contribution to employee. But it might also differ a little bit. So in clusters A and B, as mentioned on the first slide, levies are collected by public bodies such as social security agencies or ministries. This is, for instance, the case in France, in Ireland, but also in Cyprus. In these sectoral systems, cluster C, the funds themselves collect those levies, or it is outsourced to specific agencies for doing so. And they collect the levy, and this is the case, for instance, in the Netherlands and Spain's construction fund. There are also additional resources that fund the activities of training funds, and that often come from EU funds, interest, project grants, the subsidies, and further enhance, and these also further enhance kind of the sustainability of the training funds. So what do training funds do? Training funds differ not only in who governs and funds them, but also in what they deliver. Their activities typically fall into three main categories. First, and that's mostly associated with training funds, they reimburse employers for training costs. So in Cyprus, France, Denmark, Italy, and Spain, subsidies or credit can cover a significant share, up to 80% of expenses such as trainer's fee, wages, or travel. Second, they fund training providers, often through competitive calls or projects. Examples include Italy's collective accounts, Spain's Fondaya grants, or the HRDC support to accredited training centers in Cyprus. Thirdly, they directly support individuals. France Compte Professionnel de Formation, Cyprus RRP project, and the Dutch sectoral vouchers allow individuals to select training themselves. In Spain, France, and the Netherlands, funds also co-finance employee-initiated training or training leave, maintaining income security during upskilling. And they also invest in career guidance, validation of prior learning, and targeted programs for specific groups, such as unemployed workers in Belgium, Cyprus, Spain, and the Netherlands, migrants, low-skilled workers, SME employees, and graduates. And beyond financing, many funds provide training directly, so they have their own kind of training facilities to do so. Like, for instance, in Belgium, the sectoral training funds like Volta and the SFTL, which is a logistics fund, run courses in electricity, ICT, and renewable energy. And in the Netherlands, OOM and RAS, which are also sectorally based funds, operate digital learning platforms like Ozone, giving workers free access to practical training. And finally, Spain's construction fund manages a network of training centers across the country, and such an initiative really kind of ensure training remains relevant, high quality, and accessible, particularly in sectors facing rapid technological change. Besides that, what they do on training directly and how they kind of reimburse employers, many training funds also extend their mission beyond this and provide non-financial or structural support that strengthens companies, training providers, and the overall CVET ecosystem. They often assist SMEs in HR development, helping them design training plans, manage skills, and build learning cultures. For instance, in Belgium, Volta employs regional advisors who visit SMEs and small enterprises on there and support them in HR. The Cyprus HRDA fund offers project-based HR consulting to companies. And in the Netherlands, Doorzame and RAS promote healthy workplaces, support on stress management, and even recognize exemplary training companies that can support them. Training funds also collaborate with training providers directly to align training supply with labor market demands. In Belgium and Italy, they co-develop sector-specific curricula, and in Ireland, the SkillsNet Ireland works directly with universities and industry to deliver tailored programs. And at a systemic level, training funds act as knowledge hub, analyzing labor market trends, developing qualification tools, and ensuring quality assurance. Cyprus HRDA, France OPCOs, and Dutch sectoral training funds play major roles in generating skills intelligence that can also further support adult learning and CVET in the countries. And in some countries, notably Cyprus and Spain, funds also cooperate closely with the public employment services to provide training for the unemployed, which is often seen as something outside of their remit because they focus on workers in their sector. So if we then look at kind of some outputs in terms of effectiveness, evaluating training funds is a challenging task because the goals, governance, and the data vary widely. Nevertheless, several patterns emerge. So the evidence is mixed and not always comparable, but it shows that training funds stimulate employer investment in training, as was also mentioned by Patricia, and expand access to learning opportunities. And sectoral funds tend to achieve higher engagement with SMEs because of their proximity to industry, while national funds play broader system-level roles and can support kind of the systemic, in a more systemic way, the CVET system. A consistent challenge is, however, low SME participation, often due to limited HR capacities or awareness. And where funds integrate advisory or HRD support, such as in Belgium, the Netherlands, and Cyprus, participation rates and training intensity increase. Evaluations confirm positive impacts on skill development and employability, though direct links to productivity are less clearly measured. Studies from Ireland and the Netherlands highlight both progress and limitations, and funds encourage more firms to train, but outcomes vary across the sectors. So for policy and practice, 3 lessons can stand out and can be taken is that there is no one-size-fits-all model, and the design of a training fund must reflect national institutions and social dialogue traditions. Clear governance and efficient levy collections are essential to credibility and sustainability of training funds, and the most effective funds combine financial, advisory and direct provision approaches, especially benefiting SMEs and low-skilled workers. So then some concluding reflections. Training funds play a vital role in shaping CVET system and broader skills ecosystems. Their collective impact can be summarized in those 6 points. So in terms of securing funding, levy-based training funds ensure stable, sustainable financing for CVET through shared employer contribution and public resources. In terms of better alignment, they connect training supply with evolving employer skills need, improving both quality and relevance, incentivizing the participation. By reducing training costs and supporting skill mobility, they motivate more employers and employees to engage in lifelong learning. They can also kind of have a role in kind of enhancing equity by targeting schemes. Targeted schemes reach the SMEs, unemployed and low-skilled workers, addressing participation gap. Act as a knowledge hub. So funds act as knowledge hub and strategic coordinators, fostering a culture of learning and innovation. And last but not least, training funds, especially when they're organized at some distance from governmental policies and structures for CVET, allow continuity and sustainability in financial support to CVET against business cycles and fluctuating policy attention to CVET. Having an independent structure helps to mitigate government changes and priorities. And altogether, over time, they contribute to a higher productivity, economic growth and the development of expansive training cultures, enhancing skill formation and adult learning system. So that's all I wanted to share, and hand back to you, Patricia, to say a little bit more about how to establish a training fund.
Thank you, Simon. Recognizing this important role of training funds in enhancing CVET was just explained by Simon. Some countries which currently do not have training funds may indeed consider establishing one. So the question is how to do it. While we acknowledge that for each country there will be a unique way for working towards a training fund, some general guidelines are formulated. Step 1 is to identify the potential for a training fund, which is to explore this potential via a stock-taking exercise. It should assess the current provision of CVET, including employer-provided training, and identify the main barriers preventing from achieving higher levels of training provision and participation at system level, which would need to be addressed via institutional reform. So it is important to ascertain also to what extent training fund could indeed be a part of a solution. Now, what could be the barrier? If there is inadequate level of funding, this can be a key barrier which would justify establishing training fund. Alternatively, available funding may be overall at high level, but may be ineffectively distributed across areas of adult learning. Finally, funding may be available only within on and off patterns, undermining the continuous development of training culture and training provision. So properly designed training fund could be an option to secure high level with effectively distributed, stable and sustainable funding. During stock-taking exercise, particular attention also needs to be paid in relation to perceived shortcomings in the CVET provision and training market. So where quality issues are at stake, it would be ideal to address them prior to introduction of a training fund. Alternatively, training fund can also be assigned with such function of improving the quality of training provision. Moreover, it is important to see to what extent existing institutions and arrangements, so business interest organizations, skill needs forecasting, are able to achieve a good enough fit between the skills supported by the courses that are on offer and the skills which are required or rewarded by employers. And if we see that this fit is less than satisfactory, then it will be necessary to work again towards better adjustment of the provision to changing skill needs. But again, training funds can also on their own be assigned with this function. As part of the stock-taking exercises, also it is possible to identify the key stakeholders to be engaged in working towards training fund arrangements. And these will include certainly policymakers within public administration across the relevant fields and levels of policymaking, social partners, business interest organizations, training providers, and professional associations of trainers and adult educators. Step 2 is to select the legal mechanism for introducing a levy. So as the models of training funds implemented across the EU member states show, different legal frameworks may be used to impose a training levy on employers. And these include the adoption of a dedicated national law, as it is in France, Ireland, or Denmark, or using a fixed share of the existing funding streams, notably the contributions to social security system, as it is in Cyprus, Italy, or Spain, or using sectoral collective agreements, as it is in Belgium or Netherlands. So the choice of the legal framework will also depend on country's constitution. Is there a constitutional base for adopting a formal law requesting enterprises to contribute via training levy? The legal construction of the social security system, so the existing contribution base, for example, the size of the contribution to the unemployment benefits, and the balance between income and unused entitlements in the system. And finally, the current system of the industrial relations, the importance of the collective agreements at sectoral level, the scope of these agreements, so beyond the wage determination, as well as the option to make these arrangements binding for all the employers within the sector. The next step concerns the design of the training fund. So the key element in designing a training fund is, of course, determining the rate of the levy so that it can generate sufficient income for training. And the observed rates in the EU countries between 0.24 and 1% in case of the national training funds may already provide some preliminary idea about the potential range of the levy rate. I talk about the percentage of the company payroll, of course. Beyond the rate itself, it is crucial to ascertain for which and how many areas of activities the levy should be devoted. So, for example, it will make a key difference if the training fund is to support only employed, but also the training for the unemployed persons. For example, in Spain, the levy rate is 0.7%, but it is equally split for the training of employed and unemployed. The income of the levy will also be strongly impacted by the potential exclusion of economic sectors, for example, public administration, education, or health, as it happens in some cases, from contributing to and benefiting from training fund, or the application of lower levy rates or higher for particular type of companies. For example, some training funds establish lower levy rates for SMEs. Any wage-based levy needs to foresee also a mechanism which will allow to decouple the available funding for training from ups and downs of the business cycle. So levy income will be typically lower in times of economic recession, while the need for these funds will be higher exactly in these periods. So for allowing a stable funding mechanism needs to be foreseen to build up the reserves in the years of high levy income or reduce the demand for services. Alternatively, the levy may be adjusted in line with the past demand. So, for example, it is done in Denmark, where increased training participation during a recession can be covered by increased contribution after the economy has recovered. Now, training funds can and should consider the application of all forms of support for CVET known to be effective, including direct provision of financing training by the establishment of own training centers, for example, and incentive instruments, and they should provide support directed to employers, but also open lines of support tailored to individual employees. And beyond financial support, they should also organize various other types of services as counseling for employers, training needs analysis, validation of prior learning, as before presented by Simon. Training funds may also play a key role in promoting innovation in the CVET provision. The next step is to support interest mediation and interest aggregation. So to reach training funds' full potential, it is necessary to establish governance structure that will involve employers and employees' representatives in decision-making. It is also important to seek mechanisms that would facilitate collective agreements on training-related issues and interest aggregation between employers, so that there is a match between the employer demand and the training provision. Additionally, it is important to seek mechanisms to secure development, accessibility to high-quality training. And this can be achieved through leveraging the potential market power and influence of the training fund and working with other public stakeholders, business interest organizations, and professional organizations of CVET adult learning. And finally, it is necessary to ensure coordination of training fund and other key institutions of skill formation and adult learning systems. So the training funds should be integrated within existing policy frameworks, and we need to establish coordination mechanisms to avoid the competition between different sectoral funds or between funds and other institutions involved in adult learning. Coordination is vital for maximizing complementarities and ensuring the success of the training fund. And with this, I would like to thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Patricia. This is very interesting, what we have heard on these very particular institutional arrangements in quite a few member states. Because it's so interesting, even though we are a bit now out of time, I would like to open the floor for a few questions, if there are any, because that's the best opportunity now to further explore this knowledge base that has been compiled. So anybody, any questions for Patricia or Simon? There is one, please.
Yeah, good morning, Stefan from the European Training Foundation. I would have a question about poaching. Is that still an issue that was mentioned when you had your conversations with the different countries?
I can answer this based on also the previous research and the very detailed evaluation of the Dutch sectoral training funds, because while establishing the training funds, the aim is to eliminate poaching. But nevertheless, it seems that it still, to some extent, is present, because in the Dutch case, it was observed that there are very often used payback clauses, which allow employers to bind the employers to stay for a certain period of time within the company as a compensation for the training investment. So it is not like panacea, it still may happen, but it helps training fund to eliminate poaching. Yeah.
Any other question? Yes, please.
Just an interference. I think we should do something about convergence of systems. Let's say the skills passport I heard yesterday, because this is universal. We're talking about Europe being competitive. China has one system. US has is a federation. Each state might have its differences, but they have some common systems. I mean, the skills passport should be implemented, or something else should be implemented centrally. And it doesn't have to change the educational training system. The transferability of credits, training credits and stuff like that should be guaranteed some way or another. And Cedefop has to play a very important role on this issue.
Yeah, maybe I can. It's more kind of a statement than a question, I suppose. But I think what we've done in this study, these are national systems, and there's no intention to kind of make it into kind of a European-wide system. Also, for the reasons we've provided, that you need to also kind of take into account kind of the national traditions in social security structures, social bargaining, collective bargaining agreements, etc. So the training funds need to adjust and need to be tailored to that need. But I support your plea for kind of if you want. In terms of competitiveness, you need to build or need to look at kind of how these things can better communicate with each other. And I think there are at the European level, there are kind of the ESCO, the EQF, the Europass. There are multiple initiatives that try to work on that, while it's not directly the mandate of the European Commission to kind of support, to really kind of harmonize kind of education systems, obviously. So it is a kind of a challenging path to kind of go to convergence. I think that word is not really commonly used at the European level in education policies, but yeah.
Maybe, thank you, Simon. Very quick contribution. There is a concept of subsidiarity in the European Union, and it's very important probably in other regimes as well, where you need to decide at the level of coordination that is relevant and feasible and sort of reasonable at each different level of governance. And I think there is an ongoing exploration. And of course, Cedefop is very actively involved in many of the instruments that Simon mentioned in the governance of the EQF, the Europass, etc. But there is an ongoing discussion on to what extent what is feasible and meaningful to be coordinated at European level, what is at the national level, and in many cases also, as we have heard, at the regional or potentially sectoral level. So I think we need to move to the next session. But first of all, let's thank again our presenters for this very interesting presentation. Thank you. And now let me introduce the next session of the conference today, focusing specifically on exploring the potential of setting up a new training fund in Latvia. And let me introduce quickly the speakers. Firstly, Daniel Unterweger, who is a team leader and senior consultant at 3S Research and Consulting. He's specialized in consulting and comparative research and policy analysis, including education training and lifelong learning systems, active labor market policies, and questions of social dialogue and social partner involvement. Thank you, Daniel, for your presence. And also Jelena Muhina, who is working at the Ministry of Education and Science of the Republic of Latvia, specializing in adult education policy planning. She has played an active role in implementing EU and OECD cooperation projects, including the Latvian National Skills Strategy, and currently coordinates the implementation of skills-related initiatives under the RRF, the EU financing mechanism, with a particular focus on individual learning accounts and skills funds. And of course, on skills funds, we will just in a moment hear more from her. And she's also a member of the management board of Cedefop. Thank you, Jelena, for being here. So I'm giving now floor to Daniel. Jelena's presentation will follow afterwards, and then we'll take questions together for both of the presentations. And I need now again to set up the presentation, but Daniel, you can already warm up for the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mantas, for this introduction. The work I'm presenting today on Latvia is joint work carried out together with Professor Irina Maslow at the University of Latvia. And I think, first of all, it's quite important to state that the approach used for this study together with the study on Poland is quite different from the other country examinations we've done in the project, because the other ones were about assessing current training funds, and while this study is more about assessing the potential for introducing a new arrangement, a new training fund arrangement in Latvia. And for that purpose, within the study, we've basically created the description of the country's current arrangements that are relevant for introducing training funds, assessed the strengths and weaknesses of the overall funding system, carried out an in-depth analysis of which functions then a novel training fund could fulfill in Latvia, created 3 scenarios together with stakeholders on how to potentially introduce training funds in the country, and based on that also developed recommendations. All of it was done jointly with national level stakeholders in interviews, focus group discussions, and a workshop, as well as desk research. So for the presentation today, I will walk you through the reasons for introducing a training fund in Latvia, so which weakness, so to say, could be tackled and which functions a training fund could then fulfill, the scenarios we have developed and the recommendations. So concerning the reasons, in general, it is visible that in Latvia, public funding for adult learning is quite weakly developed in EU comparison. So if we, for example, look at the spending on training within active labor market policies, which are the blue bars, you can see on this graph, it is in European comparison rather low level, however partially offset by ESF funding used for that purpose, which is the red bar you can see here. But in general, this illustrates that on a more general level, there are limited public resources available, and also, as we know, and many of us will know, the reliance on EU structural funds also comes with problems of these project-based funding cycles, which often interrupt sustainable support. And so this could be one of the areas where a novel training fund could play a role. If we look at participation levels, for example, in the adult education survey, Latvia is doing quite well, so with above average participation rates, and similarly, this can also be seen in the labor force survey. And also, if we look at the continuing vocational training survey and the data there, we can see that a lot of companies are participating, but if you take a closer look, so to say, the share of the workforce participating, the intensity of the training, so in terms of hours per employed, and also the expenditure used for training of companies is below EU average. And what has also been found in particular in the national level stakeholder consultations is that in particular the sectoral and regional needs of training provision are often not accounted in the national level system of provision. And of course, among other reasons, for these reasons, training funds have been considered by a variety of recent policy documents and discussions on the national level. For example, the OECD skills strategy projects have presented it as one potential solution. It has been taken up in the country's recovery and resilience plan. There's been a technical support instrument project. I'm sure Jelena will maybe go into detail a bit, and that, of course, our work, the Cedefop study, then is supposed to complement these developments. So what we now did based on this initial information is we reviewed the potential functions a training fund could play based on this analytical framework that Patricia has already presented in the previous presentations. So just as a short recap, there are these 4 main functions a training fund can fulfill. So acting as a beneficial constraint for firms and providing incentive for firms to train, generating funds for CVET, supporting collective agreements, as well as acting as some sort of a coordination mechanism between demand and supply of CVET. And for each of these functions, we looked on the current arrangements in the country and asked the question, which of these functions are already fulfilled by other institutional arrangements? And if they are not fulfilled or only weakly fulfilled by other institutional arrangements, which role could then a novel training fund play? So let's maybe start with the first one, the incentive for firms and the beneficial constraints that are currently imposed in Latvia. We can see that, as in many countries, there are regulations in labor law with mandatory training required for some professions. There's also, as in many other European countries, a study leave, a right for study leave. And concerning the support available, financial support available to companies, we can see that there is some support, as already mentioned, based mostly on EU structural funds and some sort of tax incentives. But a novel training fund arrangement could substantially increase the level of financial support, with the levy, so to say, acting as a new beneficial constraint on employers, therefore discouraging free riding, so not training and poaching employees. The second key function, so generating funds for CVET, we can see that current available support structures are mostly based on general taxation, social security contributions as well as private sources, but overall the level of support available is quite low. And the novel training fund arrangement could provide dedicated funds that would also some sort of act as a mechanism to create some sort of a long way sustainability of funding to break with these EU-based project cycles. Concerning the collective agreements, supporting collective agreements, we can see that collective bargaining coverage in Latvia is decreasing over the past years, albeit with some sectoral variations. And one argument that can be made here is that setting up new training funds, for example, on the sectoral level and the respective tripartite or bipartite agreements that would be necessary to set up funds could revitalize also these collective bargaining arrangements in the country. And finally, on coordinating demand and supply of CVET, we can see that actually there is quite some strong social partner involvement already in the country, with social partners being involved in the governance of the overall skill formation system, so in the policy planning, program design and examinations, and also, for example, with sectoral skills councils being in existence. However, in particular on a lower level, on a sectoral level, there is still limited capacity of social partners also to communicate needs, and this is one way where training funds could play into the whole game, and therefore also some certain share of the funds raised via training funds could be allocated for capacity building activities on the sectoral level, giving social partners the capacity to better coordinate demand with supply. So based on this assessment of potential functions training funds can play in the country, we presented to Latvian stakeholders 3 scenarios, potential scenarios on the way forward. These were first national skills funds, second sectoral skill funds, and 3 regional skills funds. And during discussions with the stakeholders, we also highlighted the favorability of each scenario, with in the end 1 scenario being preferred. So one scenario that was actually discarded was the National Skills Fund. The idea behind it would be a new training fund arrangement on a national level established by national level law and administered and also co-funded by government. So not only funding via levy, but also via government funding. And due to this large role that also the state would have played in such a national level training fund, government would also have a veto position in such a national level fund. In general, what was positively perceived by this idea is that the national level fund can fulfill certain functions that, for example, sectoral funds cannot really play. So in particular, question of intersectoral mobility, so retraining from one sector to another, is something that cannot be as conveniently tackled by sectoral funds than by national level funds. Also giving incentives for individually selected adult learning. So for example, financing an ELA is more easily done via national level solutions, or at least that was the argument back then. And it would also be quite easy to introduce compared to more complex sectoral or regional level solutions. But in general, the negative points of this scenario were highlighted by stakeholders, in particularly that sustainability of government contributions to such a fund would be quite unclear. So what happens when the government decides to scale down its engagement? Also difficulties in identifying sectoral needs, so the real preferences of employers for the provided training. And ultimately, which was maybe the main point why this scenario was discarded by stakeholders, is that the legitimacy of the levy was heavily questioned as government would have a veto position in such a training fund arrangement, albeit also employers contribute to it. Another scenario that was discarded in the end was the idea of regional skills funds, which would be set up by municipalities or groups of municipalities based on a recent reform of the municipalities law, which has allocated them some responsibilities in the area of skills. in general, what was perceived quite positively by stakeholders in that scenario is that via initial EU co-funding, some weaker municipalities and weaker regions could have more funding, therefore alleviating regional disparities. And it could also be one way to tackle regional challenges like brain drain and skills shortages and so on. And also with the inclusion of social partners, the legitimacy of the levy was perceived more favorably. However, what would happen if EU co-funding would end? Then probably the stronger regions would have more money for support, and divergence across regions would maybe even enhance. And also substantial capacity building efforts would have been needed on the regional level to make such a levy and such a regional skills fund work. So what was ultimately preferred by stakeholders, and which is, as I understand, also the situation currently in Latvia, which has been chosen for further development, are the sectoral skills funds. So which would basically work on tripartite agreements on the sectoral level, involving social partners strongly in the governance of the overall system to ensure the sectoral needs of businesses are covered, with a high legitimacy of the levy, therefore, so a direct link between the contributions of employers on the sectoral level and on what actually this money is then used, for which kind of training and so on. And also in this case, initial EU co-funding could ease the introduction of the fund. There were, of course, also some challenges associated with this, for example, the challenge of intersectoral mobility and the degree of the autonomy of funds vis-à-vis a government. And based on this assessment of the scenarios, but also drawing upon the findings of the main study and of the assessment of the currently available training fund arrangements across the EU, we've developed some recommendations for introducing a training fund in Latvia, which also strongly draw upon the more general recommendations of the overall study that Patricia has already presented. So first of all, we would suggest for introducing such a training fund to ease the introduction of a training fund by achieving lower levy rates in the outset, for example, by reconfiguring business taxation or social security contributions. So, for example, if we look at the case of Italy, a certain share of the social security contributions is transferred to a skills fund, to an interprofessional fund, should such a fund be associated with the employer in the respective sector. So this could be one solution. And also, initially, EU co-funding could be used to achieve lower levy rates in the outset. And already if we, for example, account for a levy rate of 0.3% of the wage roll on a national level, so encompassing all sectors, this would already account for a yearly of more than 50 million euros. And also lower levy rates are, of course, imaginable in the outset. For the way further, we also suggest to basically not only be satisfied with some initial pilots, which of course is a good first step to introduce training funds, but in the end to really try to encourage the creation of training funds in as many sectors as possible. Of course, this maybe won't be possible in all sectors, and for this reason also ensure coherence with other existing arrangements. So in sectors where training funds are not created, other potential instruments could be imagined. And as I understood already in Latvia, some sort of a sectoral support arrangements are in place for employers, which could remain in place for the sectors where training funds could not be introduced. We would also suggest to complement training funds. So training funds are not a golden bullet, so to say. They can't fulfill all functions. So in particular, training funds might underinvest in general skills not needed in a certain sector. And for this, other arrangements like an ELA would be potentially in a better solution to achieve such aspects. But of course, they can work complementary. We would also first suggest to focus on support targeting employers, so to have some sort of, to foster the legitimacy of the levy and establish a clear link between employer contributions and how funding is used. Later then, other functions might be added. For example, if we look at the sectoral funds in Denmark, where there is also support for individually selected adult learning. But we would suggest to keep that for a later point of time, so to say. Essentially is to ensure effective interest intermediation and involve social partners in all steps of such a training fund creation, and then finally in the governance of the fund. But for this also support is necessary, and as is the case, for example, in the Spanish training fund in Fonde, a certain share of the totally generated funds could be used to support social partners, increase their capacity at the sectoral level to facilitate the governance of this training funds and also make it easier for them to coordinate demand and supply. Yes, and this was it from my side, and thank you.
Thank you. Jelena, now is your turn, and let me put your presentation. Thank you for being with us.
So thank you very much, and really thank you for researchers for in-depth look at our system, our support system, and providing this neutral insights about development so far. And I will elaborate a little bit about our Skills Funds initiatives, how far we are, and what the next steps will follow. First of all, definitely I will not go through those preconditions and challenges that was already have been described, but just to underline that really this growing need for a highly skilled workforce in Latvia is essential, having our demographic situation. Not understand wrongly, the Latvian society is quite high educated, but we see that our skills are situated in the sectors where it's maybe not currently evolving, and there's a really a shortage of specialists with STEM and vocational education. Lack of sustainable funding, definitely this issue in many countries, and unfortunately in Latvia we don't have a state budget for adult education at all, and we also our structures for EU-funded project well established and have a long-term tradition, but we see that this is not a sustainable approach how to move forward. And employer support for training you saw on the presentation, where Latvia are situated in terms of support among European countries, but at the same time I need to add that Latvia's economy is mostly based on small and micro enterprises, and micro enterprises in 90% of them, and it's really micro, 2-person, 3-person owning a company, and you can imagine if they need to support, there's no possibility to HR or something, and even if they wish to invest in the development of skills, it's not always possibility. And at the same time, we see that sometimes the short-term thinking is also trivial, that I will find a new employees instead of my needs, not investing in skills of existing one. And already was mentioned, but the ETF, skilled workforce poaching, is also one of the fears that prevent employers to invest in employees, thinking that my investment will flow up to my competitors with all my knowledge, skills, and investment. Thinking about the skills funds development, we definitely take into account our existing skills support or human capital development approaches in Latvia, and you can see that there is a clear logic in between. We try to balance the support for sectors, employers, and individuals. Also, all of these support activities are based on the labor market needs. But at the same time, for the long term, we have the support only short or medium term solutions, like immediate support needed training is provided, not thinking about the maybe long-term and sustainable structures for support. And this planning period was like a turning point when we start to use also support to develop a long-term solution, like individual learning account, where we are already established and piloting them, and skills funds for the sectoral employers. And there is also the system are working together and developed in parallel, meaning to support also the sectoral employers. And you see that there's, as was mentioned, there's some support, medium-term and short-term solution, and the skills funds could establish a long-term support framework. Talking about Latvia's journey, yeah, it already was mentioned that we have really invested in investigation about the better system, about the establishing these skills funds, how it works in other countries, meaning having this OECD skills strategy, technical support instrument project, which look in depth in different possibilities of support for employers. And here was the recommendation for us to continue collaboration and discussion with our social partners, and exactly Cedefop study was the very timely and support us with listening to the focus group discussion, listening to the feedback provided by social partners. It's boost us in the right direction. But most of all, what I would like to underline, these initiatives by our social partners. As you see, since 2017, they are persistently will explore so this kind of support activities and also put the resources and efforts to keep this idea in the political agenda, like step-by-step implementing in different support documents. We also receive funding, and finally, in this year, we also develop a regulation establishing a common framework to piloting and develop the skills funds condition. As Patricia mentioned, that skills funds, it's really individual story of each context and each country. And there are many definitions existing from different international organizations, and Cedefop also introduced the own definition. And while we are discussing with our social partners, we granted and that kind of framework for the skills funds, which is put it in the Cabinet of Ministers regulation and agreed among partners. But in all definitions, there are several points that are common for all of them. How we define skills funds in Latvia is a fund established and managed by the principle of public and private sector cooperation, the purpose of which is to support strategic, socially dialogue-based human resource development in the sector, pooling contribution from sector enterprises and other financial resources, providing support for different kind of support, education and training, skills needs identification and forecasting, evaluation of training results and other support that have been agreed among the implementator of structural of skills funds. So you see there's the main highlights in our approach. It's a public and private sector based accumulation of resources and sector-based approach, which is also presented as a negotiated outcome from debate with the social partners. As the framework provide the possibility for industry, representative of industry organization to move the process, to organize the process, to be the owner of the process. And actually, currently, we are in the stage of open call for the project, and there is a three-step approach. The first of all, industry representatives or association should establish a public-private partnership with cooperation of the sector ministry, which is responsible for human capital development in the sector, or the Ministry of Economics, which is general responsibility about the labor market development, and definitely involving trade unions. in the partnership agreement. And then they all together should develop a skills funds concept. And this is the main document that will be evaluated to receive grants from the government to develop a social funds, of skills funds. So we rely on their ideas, of their commitments, and they are drivers of the process. And the third stage is start piloting actually the proposed ideas. As I mentioned, the skills funds concept is the main document that will be evaluated. Yes, this time we are paying for idea, for the readiness to implement the vision and ability to do that. The main element of the concept is first of all, information about the skills funds, about the sector, the development and vision, the problems that should be solved organizing the skills funds. Main also aspect, the operational and governance model of the skills funds, how all the cooperation partners will be working together to reach this goal, these cooperation models, decision makings and administrative procedures in place, the partners' role and responsibilities, and also attraction of new companies to be the donors for the skills funds. Definitely the financing model and sustainability is the core of this kind of financial instrument. And what we are also expecting to receive the feedback on sources of financing and proportionality, how the private sector investment are growing over the time, and the sustainability of the proposed working model. Among other, definitely is in the core is investment in human capital development, which strategy the skills funds owner will operate. This is a description of the target group, whether it's employees in the core, but whether it could be defined some specific target audience. It could be employers not only in the sector, but also attracting new employees at the sector, identification of the skills needs, and different support mechanisms that will contribute to the human capital development in the sector. Expected results, all monitoring, data collection, description of indicator achievement, as is European financing. So there is also will be some quantitative indicator must to be reached, and definitely communication strategies. It's a new instrument in Latvia, so the communication and information activities will be also important for us. And definitely peer learning activities is a part of initiatives that we will support during the implementation. And the skills funds concept, as I mentioned, will be a core of this project application. And there will be this concept will be evaluated by international experts, not by the civil servants. And what we can offer for our sectors, first of all, the funding, it's 6.06 million euros with the state budget investment, expecting at least 5% of private investment with a gradual increase of co-financing during the implementation project. Our resources currently are counted that it could be multiple project submission from various sectors, and the sectors we're understanding broader. It could be also like a group of companies united by the single or related business processes, for example, exporting companies, defense sectors, manufacturing, or something like that. It's not usually defined in the NICE code. And what the planned results is also some impact indicators. We're expecting the person trained, person received qualifications, and the person which is improved the situation on the labor market. And On the systemic level, is already have been mentioned, but in the discussion with our social partners, we also identified some systemic level benefits that we could expect from implementing this financial instrument. Is first of all, definitely its development of human resource management system and sector-based social dialogue, which is straightened within this skills funds, promotes sectoral employers more greater ownership about the human resource development and planning, including the long-term strategy and long-term vision. It's definitely the increase of workforce participation in the skills and qualification improvements, and increase of resources within the education ecosystem as a whole. Currently, you see that we are now in the piloting phase. We are not going directly to the levy base, but definitely this kind of exercise, piloting exercise, could serve as a long-term and sustainable financing approach piloting. But definitely for the next steps, a political decision is needed to be implemented as a long-term and sustainable strategy. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Elena, very much for this presentation. We have actually seen a reform and innovation really happening in practice, which is, of course, very exciting. I presume also quite challenging. So would we have any questions for Elena or Daniel? Quickly, 1 or 2 questions. Please.
This skills fund, it's from national funds, or you also include the ESF funding for training?
Yes, we include ESF funding for training for the piloting stage. That's why the project terminated in 2029, which is the planning period. From the very beginning, there will be a European Social Fund, state budget, and co-financing from the implementator, from the sector.
Any other questions? I think we are good. We need to proceed, but thank you very much again, Yelena and Daniel, and good luck, of course, with this very exciting initiative. Thank you. And next, we now move to look also more in depth in the Polish case. And let me introduce the speakers who will provide you again this exploratory exercise looking at what could be introduced or reformed in Poland. We are aware that there is an institution called Training Fund, which is probably a little bit different. So we are very much looking forward to hear on this a little bit more. But let me first introduce the speakers. So firstly, again, like for Latvian case, we'll have a presentation from the research team, Lukas Sienkiewicz, who is an associate professor at the Faculty of Management and Economics at Gdańsk University of Technology. He's also a co-founder of the Institute for Labor Market Analysis. So Lukas, thank you for being here with us. And after Lukas, we'll have a presentation from the country, really national perspective, by Eva Flaszinska. The last names are complicated, but thank you. Who is an assistant professor at Warsaw University and director of the Labor Market Department at Poland's Ministry of Family, Labor and Social Policy. Eva, thank you for being here. And then Lukas, the floor is yours, and I'm setting up right away your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting us, especially Patricia and Mantas, but also the team who worked with us, Simon, Daniel and Gunther, who supported us throughout this study. So I will introduce you to the exploratory study we have taken in Poland, where the situation is a little bit different, I believe, than in Latvia, a little bit different starting point. It is just to say that we have taken a lot of effort as a country in the recent years to strengthen the lifelong learning and adult education. But of course, there is still need for further reforms. The context is that actually there is the closest equivalent to how the Cedefop defines in the study the training fund is the National Training Fund. which is financed from the levy, but not directly only used for the training purposes. It is collected by the Labor Fund, which is also used for other purposes, mostly for other purposes, like active and passive labor market policies, functioning of public employment services. So this money is not earmarked only for the training purposes. So we also looked at the two sectors in Poland. This sectoral perspective also encompasses our approach in Poland, where quite a lot of funds and efforts in terms of the training and skills development goes into the sectoral perspectives already before the study has been undertaken. So this differs a little bit from the starting point, but it was very interesting to explore the further possibilities to develop the funds. So in the scoping interviews, we've had quite a lot of them in Poland. We have found I would say the common denominators or the problems that a lot of perspectives for social partners and from different organizations have pinpointed in terms of the training fund and the development of skills generally. So first of all, we have found that the system is perceived as quite fragmented and uncoordinated. How far this is the truth, we will probably also have the chance to discuss. But in a sense, it is really spread. It is a big country. It is a lot of funds and a lot of ministries and other organizations involved. But the problem was that there is no central steering or coherent strategy spanning over these different ways of increasing human capital. Also, what was found is a heavy reliance on EU funds. This is true for majority of countries, but in a sense in Poland it is very visible, especially in recent years. We have quite a lot of sources, EU funds for the development. So it makes other sources at the moment, I would call it less relevant, but of course it's only temporary, and we have the understanding that we have to secure the funds also for the future. Respondents also pointed to weak governance and planning in a sense of lack of consistent mechanisms for especially identifying skills needs and to match it with the training provisions in the country. Also limited accessibility and transparency was mentioned, and what was visible, although we have quite a lot of EU money flooding the, I would say, for the market, there is insufficient volume of funding, especially particularly in the National Training Fund, in itself not able to meet the employer demand. So the funds really spent out quickly once they are available, and the employers, especially employer side, says that it is much too low to cover the actual training needs. But also we have a different situation, I would say, in the starting point of existing strengths of the system. So as we have heard also yesterday, a lot of countries spent quite a lot of effort and money into introducing, for example, the online platforms. We already have that, a well-functioning developmental services database. We already have demand-based funding system. So there is a lot of strengths to build on in terms of introducing new or modernizing existing training funds. We also looked at the three different perspectives in the study. It wasn't actually mentioned before. In the previous presentations, we looked at the reform perspective, catch-up perspective, and social investment perspectives. And in this, from these three perspectives, all of them, the need for introducing new funds or modernizing existing funds are clearly visible, and there are benefits to it. So we understand that the National Training Fund will be in the future probably the tool that will have to cover up for the limiting EU funds in the coming years. So, but it is inadequate. So also we noted that the influence of social partners on the spending of funds, as designed by the Cedefop definition, is not adequate. It is managed mostly by administration and the Public Employment Service. It needs better coordination with other supporting instruments like the developmental services database. We have now the sectoral centers for skills and the planned individual learning accounts pilot. It is really hard to function effectively in terms of development without coordinating these all efforts. And it is a challenge. And of course, we struggle for many years, that has also been visible in the slides before, with the rather low or below average adult learning participation in Poland. So with a number of barriers to that, so that can be to some extent, not all the extent, but probably to some extent also tackled by the introducing of the new training fund. But because of course, if there is a lack of time or other responsibilities, it is hard to cope with the training fund establishment. But of course, the lack of money, the lack of awareness, the lack of incentives for the employers themselves can be to some extent tackled by this system. It is also important from the social investment perspective. I would say especially from the perspective of a pooled, predictable fund, because it is not project-based. We can, as we have heard from Professor Sang yesterday, we can to some extent extrapolate or calculate the incomes, the spendings. We can plan in the long term. So this could also support this perspective if we aimed a little bit more at modernizing the funds. I will not be reading all of these slides, surely, due to the lack of time, but we also looked at these 4 specific functions already mentioned by in previous presentations. But what was interesting for me, really interesting, because all of them play a role, definitely, and we found evidence that all of these functions can be effectively supported by the new or modernized training fund. But what was the most important factor is actually mentioned by majority of our respondents, was the key function B. This was a little bit surprising for me, so meaning generating public collective funds, because really we, in terms of the EU ASF funded projects and other money for the development, we have quite a lot of funds. But in a sense, the respondents, the social partners, understand that this is not a permanent situation. So in a sense, we have to really make sure and secure the funding for the future, build the system now to start its development for the future, where the EU money will not be available in such amount. So this is surprising in a sense, because I thought for initially that maybe the support for the collective dialogue or collective agreements will be strongly pinpointed, but no, actually this was the key function, and key function A also, which was really important for at least some of our interviewees, constraining free riding, poaching, or other unethical practices, I would say, in sense of the training funds. So, but as I said, all of these functions have been visible in the as the possibility of being supported by the new training fund in Poland. So we, on basis of that, we developed again the 3 scenarios, a little bit different scenarios than in Latvia. We first of all analyzed the possibility of establishing a new training fund with the assumptions closer to the Cedefop's approach, a new training fund based on the levy, collected through social security system as one of the well-established mechanisms, not to create the new platforms or the new I would say bodies for that, based on tripartite governance, managed by social partners, ensuring permanent independent finding. And we found that, of course, this system or this scenario would have quite a lot of strengths: stable, dedicated, self-financing mechanism, social partner ownership, of course, and shared responsibility culture, and coordinated national response to the challenges. But we also found out that there is a very strong opposition in terms of the almost all of the stakeholders we interviewed, showing that, of course, there are strengths to it, but it needs really quite a lot initial implementation and setup cost at the beginning. And of course, also administrative complexity, building a new organizational structures as we want to create really a new institution and mechanism. That is also a potential duplication with existing mechanisms. And interestingly, quite a low political and employer organization acceptance. Of course, employers due to the new levy that would need to be collected, but generally also other social partners pointed to disagreement with this new approach, stating that if there are mechanisms that we can follow and improve that are already existing, probably the development of the new training fund, at the moment at least, is something that can be hard to implement, although not at all impossible. The second scenario was the reform of the existing national training fund. And I think this is a very interesting example of how we can build on current system, but of course with the need to modernize the fund. The points of this modernization would need to follow the enhanced role of social partners, because actually now the system is managed by the public authorities. Social partners have influence on how the money are being spent, setting up the priorities for spending, but they do not manage the fund itself. They do not decide on operational aspects of the fund management. They also point out that in this scenario, we assume that there will be a very much increased number of, scale of funding, but also the scale of the levy. Directly earmarked for the training spending of the fund. So the Employers Association estimated that what they would expect is the 5 times higher spending than currently being paid from the National Training Fund. So it's a substantial increase from the current numbers. But also distribution mechanisms would need to be aligned, as well as improved coordination and broaden scope. So the objective would be here really to modernize and to make it a more semi-autonomous national training fund, supporting both sides, both employers and employees. So this approach, this scenario has quite a lot of strengths, including using the existing well-recognized structures, enhances social partner influence. This is also high feasibility reform, if I will tell about it a little bit later, and expands the coverage. But of course, there are also weaknesses, which is still making the fund not independent, but dependent on the labor fund, priorities and fiscal constraints. So this changes quite a lot due to some pressures, I would say political pressures too, risk of uneven implementation across regions, and this was also pointed in our study that the regional perspective for skills development is really important, especially in a large country like Poland. And but I think the point also is that it requires sustained political commitment, and this is quite risky in terms of the changing governments and political priorities. And the last scenario we analyzed and we proposed was the sectoral training funds. We have, as I said, quite a lot of work already been done in the sectoral skills councils and their influence on the priorities for spending. But the idea here was to establish a separate training funds at sector industry level, actually governed and managed by these sectoral bodies in the form of the sectoral skills councils or other sectoral representatives that would actually not need an additional employer levy. So it would be redirection of funds already existing from different sources to the sectors, which would have more influence on how the spending is being directed towards the sectoral needs as they have a better understanding of what is actually needed. So this scenario is also, in a sense, viable because we already have the structures and partnerships, but of course sparks a lot of debate regarding the credibility, the governance, but also it does not really increase the funds because it's not additional levy. So in a sense, it does not build the resilience for the future in terms of the funds availability. Summing up in 2 slides, if we also looked summarize the favorability of scenarios between our participants of the focus groups and also the final workshop we've had on that, and the most feasible and low-risk scenario is the second scenario because it builds on existing structures, and overall favorability was high and most realistic, especially in the short term. But of course, if we do consider that other approaches can build a more developed perspective, especially in the long term, but they need more risky, they need more effort, and they need more involvement from different social partners, but also political will. So we earmarked the scenario 2 as the one that should be followed in the short term, but also other scenarios, especially the sectoral training fund scenario, could be followed for further development. We also formulated, disregarding which scenario will actually be implemented, some recommendations that could help, in fact, development of the training funds in current and future forms at the Polish level, because they address really the weaknesses of the current system. So first of all, we really need to increase or enhance stakeholder engagement. It's nothing close to what we observe like in the Netherlands or training funds or in the other countries covered by the study. Stakeholders are engaged, but they really need to take not only the decisive power, but also the responsibility for the training funds, which is currently very much limited. We need to really increase financial allocation, and it needs new ways to gather the levy, especially when the EU funds are being limited. What we really have to strengthen to understand how this system functions is the evidence-based policy in terms of understanding what actually works for whom and how in terms of the money being spent, because it's not just the burning of money, right? It's supposed to bring effects in terms of the skills increase, not only for now, current needs, but also for the needs of the future. And of course, we need to facilitate sectoral involvement. We have already learned in Poland that this is really effective mechanism of understanding more down-to-earth needs of the sectors, and I am a very strong proposer for that also. What has also been noted, but I think it is common in majority of the countries, is the administrative complexity and accessibility of funds. So there were a lot of points where we could actually improve also current system in terms of the administration and accessibility of funds. Thank you so much for attention. I hope I wasn't too long in the presentation. Thank you all.
Not at all. And then Eva, the floor is yours, and I'm setting you your presentation in a second.
Thank you very much. It is very difficult to talk after Łukasz, but I will try. Firstly, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the authors of the report and the Cedefop for their excellent and valuable work, because some of the recommendations we implemented in Poland. I will tell you about it, because in this year we implemented a new Labor Market and Employment Services Act. It is a big reform in Poland, so I think it is important. But firstly, I would like to tell you a few facts about Poland labor market, which is undergoing deep structural transformation. The country faces simultaneous pressures, as you see, is digitalization, automation, AI, green transformation, robotization, and we have a big problem with demographic, because the working age population is shrinking while the fertility rate dropped to 1.12 in 2024. It means it is one of the lowest in the EU. And labor shortages are now reported in most sectors, especially in digital and technical occupation. And of course, as for example, you see Eurostat indicators, we have a good situation in the labor market in general, but we have a lot of problems and challenges in human capital. For example, skill shortages coexist with underused labor potential. In the end of 2024, we are a big country. Poland is 38 million inhabitants. 10% of these people, it means 3.8 million Poles, remained economically inactive. Among them, about 30% due to education, 25% due to illness or disability, about 18% because of family responsibilities, 8% due to retirement. At the same time, 26% of the unemployed have at most lower secondary education, and 32% lack professional qualifications. Only 10% of adults participate in education or trainings in the 4 weeks preceding the 2024 survey. And of course, we would like to improve this indicator. At the same time, in the PIAC study shows that nearly 40% of adults in Poland have problems with reading and solving skills. So it's also the big problem for us. Łukasz said about National Training Fund. To imagine this, we have labor fund, you can imagine like, for example, a cake, and the National Training Fund is a part of this cake. And every year, about 4 up to 6% of the labor funds is for the National Training Fund. It is about, how to say, this Polish zloty, about 300 million. I don't know, it's about 75 million euro. And I would like to show you this, because this National Training Fund, we called it KFS, was established in 11 years ago, in 2014. And you can see how many people use this fund for the trainings and how to say, low this budget, yes? And the next slide shows which kind of entities by sectors in 2024 use this training fund. Because if we talk about people, it is about every year in generally about 100,000 individuals benefit from this fund. But if we say about sectors, we can see that health, manufacturing, trade, professional, construction, education, accommodation, transportation and logistics, and other. So there are more popular benefits. And in this year, we prepared, and our government adopted, and our parliament passed a new Labor Market and Employment Service Act. It is a big reform because it is a big act in Poland, more than 435, I think, articles in this act, and it is complex. It means it is about not only, of course, trainings, but also in public about public employment services, about active and passive labor policy, etc., etc. But the Act modernizes employment services, increases flexibility and reduces bureaucracy, and it strengthens the National Training Fund as a strategic tool to finance lifelong learning for employers and workers. And of course, a lot of recommendations, which Łukasz talked about it, were implemented in this act. For example, maybe I will show you by the colors, because some of rules are the same, like in the past, but the red line are the new, in the new act from this year, and in context to the report of Cedefop, we implemented a recommendation. Of course, if we talk about money, so I can say that still far below the recommendation. It is a problem not, I think, only in Poland, but in the other countries, the money is a problem. So we see that the money still far below the recommendation. But, for example, all funds are available at the start of the year, ensuring predictability for training initiatives. Importantly, eligibility has been expanded to include self-employed individuals, because in the past only workers could use this fund. Now everybody, and also those working under civil law contracts. So it is we spread the possibility for people to use this fund. The introduction of higher employer co-financing and differentiate annual funding limits per applicants based on entity size aims to optimize costs, stimulate great private investment in employee training, and ensure access to KFS fund for a larger number of applicants. Because we consider the level for every employer, for every potential beneficiaries, because we would like to spread it to many persons. So if we, of course, predict that the benefit is not very high, but for example, average for everybody, we can also predict that many more people will be use this fund in the future, of course. So we in this law we have some level. It is about in Poland we have average wage and 200% of average wage in Poland is up in for everybody. And yes, every year, yes. And in the past, we had that only minister, indicate every year, prioritize for National Labour Training Fund. And we changed it. And now funding prioritized set by ministry, but up to 4, max 4. Regional level max 3 and county powiat governments 1. So every level or from our administration in Poland, every level has established, has proposed could propose some priorities for this national training fund. And also, we reform addresses also other systemic weaknesses. So now, for example, we improvements, some keys include mandatory registration of training providers in the development services database. In Poland we say BUR. Higher quality of training. We more streamline application process, minimum deadline regarding calls for proposals such as announcement dates and the duration of the calls. We unified electronic application system, so one document, not different documents in every, for example, Powiat Labor Office, one document. And we also stronger monitoring and evaluation of KFS funded activities. But we see also challenges because, of course, as Łukasz said, it was a lot of recommendation in this report. And we also see that we should, in the future, increase financial resources because it is a problem every year because many people would like to use this fund and of course it is lack of money in some part of the year, lack of money for some people who would like to use it. And of course we would like to broader use of the development service database. We would like to expand training offerings matching labor market and employee needs and promote innovation in educational and training. And we would like to, because it is very important to further developing evidence-based policy. It is, like you said, it is very important also. So, to sum up, Łukasz said about 3 scenarios. And for me, and I think for my colleagues from the ministry, we think that the better is the second scenario, so because some of reform we did, and we think that the more we could do in the future. Thank you.
Thank you much, Eva. Thank you also, Łukasz, for presenting situation in Poland and also showing how really work of Cedefop inspires reflection and even very concrete action in the country. So thank you very much for that. Very quickly, any questions on the floor, and then we have to break for the break, which is already will be shorter. Anybody burning question? Yes, we have from the floor. Yes.
Sorry, I will use the opportunity also to address many researchers that are in the room. As I mentioned, our concept will be evaluated by the international researchers. So if you are interested to be a part of this new reform, new initiative, and to participate in evaluation, just send to me email this week, and you will be contacted by our procedure agency in this term. So it's just, yeah, we use this opportunity for collaboration with the research as well. So thank you very much for this possibility.
Thank you, Elena. So please reach out to Elena. Now we break for the coffee break, and we are back in a bit more than 10 minutes at 12:10. Thank you.
What are the provisions for the SMEs that don't have the expertise or the personnel or the capacity building to organize training specialized for their personnel?
I suggest you exchange during the coffee break because it's very short. So in case then I follow-up questions, I suggest a bilateral exchange. Thank you.
That's then Christmas. Isn't it critical?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, you're busy. You're working now.
I'm doing many things at the same time. Listening, working, taking notes,
Oh
preparing
my
posts.
God. Oh, multitasking.
Sorry. Cool. Sorry, I'm a bit
Let me invite you to get your seats, because we want to start on time and finish on time so that everyone on time can do the follow-up plans, catch the planes or get the tour or get the bus or get the taxi or get more discussion, but during the lunch break. We really had a short coffee break, but we wanted really to make the most of the presentations and the speakers that have kindly joined in our conference today. We are still waiting for the last panelists to rush in through the door, but then I will start slowly introducing the session, because really that's the last session, and then it's the lunch break, of course the closing, and then the lunch break, and then the departure time for catching the flights, etc. So while the final panelist is, I'm sure, arriving in 1 or 2 minutes, let me start introducing the roundtable session overall. As an introduction, we had a long day yesterday, and we have constructed with Patrizia this conference in a way that we have opened, if you remember, with really a broad picture. We had an intervention by the Commission on the policy framework. We also tried to discuss and put together in a one picture the different instruments that Cedefop has been working over really many years. We saw the very first report from 81 actually very soon after the establishment of Cedefop. And actually it's coincidental, because we have 50 years this year of Cedefop, and we have almost 50 years of working in Cedefop on the topic of financing. And I see the last panelist is coming. We have the space ready for him, and I'm just summing up where we start. And we had a presentation with Patrizia setting up the picture of adult learning, the financing of adult learning, different streams of public financing of adult learning. And with this panel, and afterwards we delved into, we really looked into very specific instruments, the adult learning, individual learning accounts. This morning we looked at the training funds. And now with this last panel, we really want then to zoom back to the bigger picture, also looking more towards the future. And this is what we were trying now to achieve in the discussion. And I'm very happy we have 3 participants here on the floor, and we also have another participant who, for very good reasons, but unfortunately for us, wasn't able to attend the conference today. But he has sent us a video message, and I'll of course start first with the video message and then proceed with a discussion with our panelists. So let me introduce the panelists that kindly joined us for the conference and for the panel today. First of all, as I mentioned to you, for an online address, we will have Robert Plummer, who is a Senior Advisor for Social Affairs in Business Europe, a confederation of European businesses. Robert is a Senior Advisor responsible for issues concerning migration, mobility, education and skills, social dialogue, and the European Labour Authority. Following Robert's intervention, we will have an address by Mario Patuzzi, just to the left of me, Chair of Cedefop Management Board. Mario is the head of the Unit Vet Policies at the DGB Federal Executive Committee in Berlin. He's a political scientist and social business economist and has worked as a trade union secretary already for more than 20 years, since 2004, initially in the area of trade union youth. He represents the German Trade Union Confederation, I mentioned DGB, on numerous bodies, including Cedefop's management board. Mario, thank you for being here with us. Next, further to the left, we have Raffaella Kicher, who is Secretary General of the European Association for the Education of Adults. So that's a body more representing the providers of adult learning, more non-formal providers. Raffaella Kicher is the Secretary General, as I mentioned, and she's also the elected Secretary General of the European Lifelong Learning Platform, an even more comprehensive body representing the different interests and different actors in the lifelong learning and adult learning system. And finally, further and the last, but by no means the least, on the left is Marcella Milana, an associate professor at the University of Verona and a honorary professor of adult education at the University of Nottingham. She is also chair of the European Society of the Education of Adults, ESREE, editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Lifelong Education, and co-editor of the book series Palgrave Studies in Adult Education and Lifelong Learning. So as you have seen, we have 4 very interesting perspectives from 4 stakeholder groups: the employers, the unions, the provider view, and then also the researcher or academic view. So let me start with the video message, and I'll just starting you in a second.
Hello, I would like to start by thanking Cedefop and the colleagues that have organized this important conference about the financing of adult learning. I'm happy to be able to share the views of Business Europe, one of the EU-level cross-industry employers organizations, on this key topic. I would like to start with some key contextual elements that we as employers see as framing the discussion around adult learning and its financing. Europe continues to experience significant skills gaps and shortages. And this is a multidimensional issue. I won't go now into all the different factors contributing to these shortages, but certainly what we can take from this is that investment in skills development and a better alignment of training with employers' needs must be key parts of the solution going forward. Sometimes in skills debates, I think there's the notion that employers are not doing enough to invest in skills development and that they see spending perhaps as a cost and less so as an investment. But I don't think we can say that today. Certainly from our member federations and the companies that we directly represent, it's clear that spending on skills and workforce development is not only an investment, but also a strategic imperative in the context that we're in. It's an investment that can support growth, innovation, productivity, as well as the overall competitiveness of companies in Europe. In this vein, we very much welcome and support the emphasis that the new European Commission is putting on competitiveness at EU level. With Europe's competitive edge under pressure, the need indeed to strengthen the skills base is more pressing than it's ever been. A skilled workforce is essential for attracting investments and ensuring a dynamic single market with enhanced economic security. The European Commission has estimated that around half of Europe's workforce may need to be upskilled and reskilled in the years ahead. Now, this is a significant challenge for all companies, for all employers, but of course, especially so for SMEs. This also provokes the need to reflect on how to widen access to adult learning and indeed how to finance it. Firstly, on broadening access to training, there's a particular need for more flexible and modular forms of adult learning. For example, micro-credentials and short-cycle courses we think can play an important role in this respect. And such training formats enable employers to build into their training programs the new and emerging skills needs that they face, while of course at the same time supporting employers in adapting to new labour market realities and changes and in the acquisition of the skills for those adaptations and doing so within shorter time periods. On a more strategic level, I'm sure that you're aware now with the key points that were made in the Draghi report around Europe's competitiveness and in particular the approach to skills development and training. Draghi makes the case for a more coordinated approach to skills development at EU level, and of course, while doing so, respecting the national competences in this area. The follow-up to the Osnabrück Declaration of a few years ago, as well as the recently adopted Herning Declaration, identify common priorities in the area of VET at EU level. And these documents and strategies have an important role to play in this respect, as does the monitoring of their implementation, which is done, of course, by Cedefop and the ETF. Turning specifically to the financing of adult learning, Draghi also made a very pertinent point about the need to better support and incentivize employers to provide training. A European Commission statistical report on adult learning a few years ago identified that 90% of job-relevant training in the EU is already funded by employers. And as I mentioned earlier, employers are convinced of the need to invest in training of their workers. Naturally, we think that social dialogue also plays an important role in identifying and delivering adult learning opportunities. At the same time, we also see a need for targeted support to help employers provide effective training opportunities to their workers, taking into account national industrial relations systems and education and training practices. The recent Union of Skills initiative rightly highlights the need for member states to maximize the financing opportunities available to them through the European Social Fund Plus. And in this respect, it is indeed important that when programming ESF funding, the member states work closely with employers and jointly with social partners to stimulate employer-driven investments in skills and to deliver more effective training solutions. The skills priorities identified in the Herning Declaration, as well as through the European semester process, should guide the allocation of ESF funds at national, regional and sectoral level going forward. Where necessary, we would also encourage member states to draw on the technical support that the Commission can provide through the technical support instrument that we have at EU level, which can help to initiate skills reforms in the national and regional context. Therefore, looking ahead to the next ESF programming period, which will start in a few years in 2028, Business Europe is calling for at least 50% of ESF resources to be earmarked for skills development, as well that 15% of ESF funding should be dedicated to financial incentives that directly provide support to employers to give training to their workers. The Erasmus program can also be strengthened and can further improve investment in education and skills, notably as concerns learner mobility. Lastly, I'd like to comment on some elements linked to state aid and to public co-financing. Again, we welcome the proposal in the Union of Skills communication to assess, as part of the review of the General Block Exemption Regulation, if state aid rules applicable to training need to be updated in order to provide better incentives for industry to invest in the upskilling and reskilling of their workers. I would also underline that in many member states, the co-funding of continuous vocational education and training by the state plays an important role in securing a system that is accessible for SMEs and for employees. For SMEs in particular, if the supply of CVET would rely solely on private financing, there is the potential risk that financial constraints could limit the supply and ultimately the demand for adult training provision. To give a concrete national example, Denmark has 2 public schemes that are regulated by law. These schemes reimburse part of the wage costs to companies or compensate the employee for the part of the income loss when taking time off to participate in training. On top of the public system, the social partners have established collective schemes, competence training funds, in their collective agreements. Such schemes provide additional funding for employees and for companies when participating in formal learning activities. Both the co-funding of the supply of CVET and the reimbursement schemes contribute to making CVET more accessible and affordable. Through Cedefop's work on training funds, we know that other countries, examples include Latvia and Poland, are looking at establishing such training models. We think that training funds can be of significant added value, and as a result of what is often a social partner governance model, they are a good way to address the interests of both employers and workers. So I hope these reflections resonate with the discussions that you've been having over the course of these 2 days. And looking ahead, I think we see certainly as employers that a lot is already being done by the private sector when it comes to training provision, investment and provision, but that in some cases additional financial support from the EU and national levels is needed for those companies that have less resources. And if we are really to address and challenge address the challenges that we face in Europe, this support has a vital role to play. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a good continuation of the discussion.
So with thanks from our side for Robert's intervention, I would like now to turn to our panelists, but let me just put on something for the background. Perfect. And then I would like now to turn to Mario. And as we have just heard about from Robert about the financing at the EU level, which is perceived as really important, but then looking at also at the national level, the national contributions and the training funds, I would like to ask you now, with the recent EU initiatives and most prominently, of course, individual learning accounts, there seems to be an ambition to stimulate or to encourage member states to contribute more to adult learning systems from the national sources. So how would you see from the perspective of employees and individuals more generally these existing and ongoing upcoming European policies and initiatives concerning public support for individuals, both horizontally like individual learning accounts, but also those more targeted and available EU financing instruments such as the ESF, the co-financing efforts? What are the remaining gaps or shortcomings? What are the blind spots that you would see require further research or policy action? Mario?
Thank you. I have to tell you, at the beginning, when ILA, the recommendation, or the draft recommendation on ILA was discussed, we were very critical, which is not surprising today. After all, ILA was presented as a kind of bank account for training and CVET. And now we know, and we acknowledge, and we have to point it out again and again, that the recommendation on ILA represents a broader approach, and it is about rights and entitlements. It is about strengthening training and CVET for individuals, either employees or workers, or citizens or inhabitants of the European Union. So we welcome these initiatives because these initiatives reflect a commitment to increase participation in adult learning and addressing the challenges ahead posed by digitization, decarbonization, evolving labor market, wild economies, developments, and especially the goal of achieving 60% of participation of adults in training by 2030 is very important and we appreciate it very much. Particularly, I would like to emphasize one big point in the ILA recommendation, and it's the right to training. It's a fundamental principle aligning with the European Pillar of Social Rights. But what does this mean? For us, it's very important. I don't want to tell you or present you now definitions. I would like to tell you what, from the perspective of ordinary workers, employees, but also of unemployed and ordinary citizens, what this means. And the main concerns of them are updating their skills and competences in order to make their work better and easier. It's about job security, about professional development, and also about professional reorientation, to avoid the terms re- and upskilling. And to do this, employees and workers need enough time. They need sound financial and enabling non-financial support, and also good and quality assured training opportunities. The way in which they do this can be arranged in different ways. The important thing is that they are given the opportunity and that they can take advantage of it. That is what the right to training is all about. When it comes to the workplace, where most workers and employees are in their lifetime, most of the training takes place within the company. Many companies do not offer training. In Germany, we have 40% of all companies who don't offer training to their employees. When they do offer training, it is primarily managers who benefit. So that's the situation. The situation is also, and it's also true, that many companies, especially SMEs, lack the resources, meaning that there is not only a lack of training opportunities, but also a lack of targeted personnel and training planning. To be clear, employers are responsible for workers and employee training. This should be placed during working hours and be paid for by the employer. And of course, workers and employees and their representatives should have a say in what training is necessary. However, we should take care to ensure that public funding is not increasingly used for this purpose. We fear that the concept of ILA can in the end lead to a situation that the public, in the funding for ILA, is used for company-related training, and that should not be the case. That's very important. Instead, concepts of training funds should continue to be promoted. They are a suitable concept for mobilizing financial and also non-financial resources for companies, for workplace training. And so I'm very thankful for the research of Cedefop and the colleagues here in regard of the training funds. I think this is very important. And we should all go back in our member states and think about how we can make use of it. When it comes to individual training, so employees are also in a position to decide for themselves which training courses they want to take, especially when it comes to professional development and reorientation. And the ILO recommendation provides important pillars for this. One pillar is paid leave. We know this is a very difficult issue for many, but in view of future shortage of skilled workers, we need solutions here so that employees can gain further training, further qualifications, and it would be very helpful if there could be pilot projects, for example, at EU level to implement better handling of paid leave, for example. Also, we need also projects on better targeted inclusions for workers in SMEs and micro-enterprises, workers on non-standard contracts and low-qualified workers, especially workers with basic skills deficits. I think this is a very important issue for a really inclusive approach of especially the ILA concepts. Coming to an end, a few recommendations. On research, I think we need more monitoring. Yes, it's helpful. Of course, we need more data, but I think also we need more qualitative research so that we know what's behind statistics. That's very important. Second point, quality assurance. Everyone says we need more quality assurance. Training offers should be quality assured. Yes, but many organizations have a very old-fashioned view on quality assurance. And I think we could need research on this topic, how we can modernize it. And last point, of course, social dialogue is important. I don't want to tell you why. You've heard a lot. But when it comes to reforms, and we saw it in Latvia and Poland, for example, then we need also capacity building for social partners and also for the other stakeholders in society, because when there is something new, usually organizations are not prepared. And so we need to integrate capacity building when it comes to reforms. And social dialogue is always important. It eases challenges and problems. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mario. And indeed, your intervention resonates to many of the topics we have touched upon both today and yesterday in the conference. And also thank you very much for your kind words for Cedefop work. And from Mario, we now heard quite a bit on the learning, very much on the work context in relation to employment relationship, of course. And let me turn a little bit to Rafaela, because, of course, our conference is a bit broader. It's very important, the training on the work setting, and we have dedicated a whole morning today specifically on these sort of arrangements. But of course, some of the initiatives like ILA go beyond, as also Mario mentioned. And therefore, I would like a little bit a reflection from Rafaela, who is representing here, as I already shortly mentioned before, the European network of providers, mostly non-formal providers of adult learning. And Rafaela, over time, adult learning providers have seen many shifts in their financing arrangements. arrangements, presumably going more from stable, regular direct budgetary financing, if we think of the public part of financing, towards more project-driven or competitive financing models. Also, there may have been rapid boom-bust cycles and shifts in target populations. For example, what happened during the financial crisis, as of course all of us know, with the unemployed, or during COVID again towards the retention of workers, or again through the migration crisis. So my question then to you, to what extent would you agree with this general assessment of the changes over the longer term and the shifts over the shorter term that I just shortly tried to go through? And if you do agree to a certain extent, how would you see these changes affecting the landscape of adult learning providers, their operational capabilities? We just heard from Mario about the capabilities at the country level, national level, but also then the provider capabilities, the availability of qualified staff, and the quality of provision, very much linked to what Mario also mentioned just before. What could be done in terms of policy action or research to address such capability gaps? Rafaela?
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to speak at this event, and presenting also a somewhat different perspective. As Mantas already mentioned, we are the network of mainly non-formal adult education associations. Think of folk high schools, for instance, typical adult education centers, especially in Central Europe and the Nordic countries, but we work across Europe. So I guess this is perhaps somewhat different from some of your experiences. I understood that many of you here represent actually VET and CVET, which is again kind of separate from what we do, but I think there is a lot that we have in common, and I just want to tell you a few some information that we collected with our country report survey from this year. The report will be launched in December, so you get an exclusive snapshot of the results. And in our survey, it says, well, 50% of the respondents, again, this is in our network, they reported a deteriorated funding situation. This includes countries such as Hungary, Turkey, Germany, Finland, the UK, and Sweden. Then 1/3 of the respondents said that the situation has stayed the same. This includes Portugal, Switzerland, Austria. And at the time that we did the survey, it was also Belgium, even though the situation has dramatically declined in the last months due to a new order to basically defund adult education. And 1/6 of the respondents said that the situation has slightly improved, so these exist too, and this includes Ireland and Slovenia. And of course, if you have any other experience, then I'd be very interested to hear about this experience after the panel. So back to your question, you asked me if I agree with this assessment. I do very much agree with this assessment that there is increasing operational fragility and also difficulties with planning horizons. We can see that there is more and more project-based funding, more competition also among providers to actually access this funding, because it's usually via calls or tenders that organizations can get funding for programs. And it means more staff time that is needed for fundraising than the actual content development work. We also see issues with working conditions for adult educators. Many work with short-term contracts. There's a high staff turnover, loss of institutional knowledge, all these cascading effects that we see when there is also a loss of funding in the sector. And of course, also discouragement of professional development. Again, if there's no funding for it, then this is where organizations usually make the cut. This also has an impact on the quality and the pressure to propose ever new programs. So there is no real possibility anymore for many providers to deepen their knowledge, to really acquire experience over time, because they need to be innovative unfortunately in a negative sense, very rapidly. They need to come up with new concepts very often and don't actually have the time to also do proper monitoring, see what works, what doesn't work, and build on that basis. It means regular changes also in funding instruments, and they require also rethinking of programs. So think about a change of, for instance, a voucher system to an ILA system. This means that providers have real challenges in continuing their programs and also having that planning security that whatever they were able to provide with a different funding instrument will still be there in a new one. And I don't think that I need to tell you, but usually what happens is when there's a new instrument, a previous one is then defunded. So it's not that we stack up the different instruments, it's just that they are replaced. And then another critical point here is the access. If we see that shifting of costs for adult learning to individuals, where public funding initially was there and is dwindling, we can see a loss of access, mainly for the disadvantaged groups. And this is very, very visible in countries that now see a defunding of adult education programs. This includes also Sweden, Finland, and as I mentioned earlier, Belgium. What we can see across all countries is that these groups of society that mainly need adult education don't have the access to it anymore, because they are the ones who are supposed to co-fund or finance programs completely through fees. And if you don't have the means, then it means that you also don't have the access. And for organizations, it also means cutting costs in guidance services, in outreach services, and so on. All of these mechanisms that help providers actually to attract learners, to retain learners, especially from the disadvantaged groups. And finally, we see also a distortion of the mission of adult learning providers and a further fragmentation of the field. And this is perhaps something that sounds a bit new or strange, because we come from a situation that is already that has a very strong fragmentation, but what we can see is that when organizations try to adapt to different funding programs, to try to, if they adapt their programs also to the funders, and have this over-focus on work-related learning, then they somewhat also lose the possibility to provide what they actually meant to provide, and create these networks that they need to actually protect their space. And perhaps a last point that we see on funding. There is a visible cascading effect in countries that lose national and regional funds, that organizations turn to European funding, and typically this is Erasmus Plus funding, ESF Plus funding, and so on. And there is now very new data also on how these funding instruments are used. We can see that in Erasmus Plus, for instance, in some countries the success rate to get a project approved is now around 11%, which is very low. And in Horizon Europe, we can also see that applications only this year have increased by 80%. So it means that when organizations build experience in Erasmus Plus and ESF Plus, then eventually they will move to Horizon because there's more money in that program. And we just see budgetary shifts. It's not that there is more money in the system overall, it's just that it changes where the money comes from. Now, if we look at policy actions, what we really need is more supply-side funding. In all this discourse on demand-side funding, meaning individuals getting funds to access learning, we shouldn't forget the supply side, because if you defund the supply side, it means that there is just nothing that individuals can access once they get their individual funds, because the structures aren't there anymore. It also means that the staff isn't developed and so on. So we need to make sure that there is this core funding. And we need to make sure that there's also contingency of funding when European funding stops. We have seen that in countries that heavily use ESF plus funding to, so to say, start up programs. Once the ESF plus funding stops, there is no national or regional follow-up funding, so these programs just stop. And this includes, for instance, also programs for prison education, for basic education, and so on. All of those programs that actually get the people where they are and where they have most need. We need to protect existing national and regional public funding where it still exists, and you've heard that figure of 0.5% several times during the conference. 0.5% of the GDP that is spent on adult education, which is actually a figure that already includes a lot of the formal programs, because in many countries the reality is that funding for non-formal adult learning, meaning shorter courses, non-certificate courses, are 0.0% or 0.1%. So it's so small that it's not even captured in the European statistics. And as I said, usually the practice is when a new instrument is introduced, another one is defunded. Now, if we look at the efficiency of the system, I guess there's a lot that could be improved, especially when we look at establishing new programs or new funding instruments, such as ILAs. We've heard that establishing such an instrument can actually take up 70% or more of the actual funding just to create the program. The maintenance of such an instrument also costs money, and the question is how much actually gets to the learner at the end of the day and how much is absorbed by the system. In all of that, the learner must be at the center. For us, as even though we represent the network of providers, we think that all needs to start with the learners and their needs. They need to be included in political decision-making processes when it comes to the funding of adult learning, to move away from that paternalistic approach that we can still see, like creating a new program because it might be good for the learners and then it turns out that it isn't. Yeah, this is really important, and the consensus that learning is not only for children, but also for adults. And this is so self-evident, but we are still so far away from the 60% of adults participating in adult learning. Just very final remarks. Terminology matters. We've heard talk about user experience and so on when it comes to ILAs. Let me just note that adult education is not a product, and we don't like that terminology that is speaking of adult education as a product, as a commodity, because essentially lifelong learning is a human right, and we should all remember that. On the data, just very finally, we need more longitudinal studies on the benefits and the so-called return on investment, if you like to use that term. We also need more workforce studies on adult educators and more data on the participation and the mode of delivery or andragogical approaches. Because at the end of the day, it's also about how we motivate learners, how we can make sure that they go to adult learning, that it's meaningful to them, that it's really connecting to their experience, and so on. And yet, we also see that we have produced a lot of data in the last decade, but again, the public support, public funding of education is dwindling. So more data is not the solution, but it can help us, of course, to make better what we already have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rafael. And actually, many things that you have mentioned about the need to really include or make instruments and systems inclusive and being able to address vulnerable groups has already been mentioned. Quality, as you mentioned yesterday, really half of the discussion was of the difficulties of ensuring quality and really looking into capabilities of providers, the right providers. And I think that also linking also to Mario a little bit, in a number of countries, like if you think Denmark, probably Sweden, at least from my own back knowledge, the networks of providers, they serve really different populations. You have really substantial structures that can provide also work-related, more basic skills and inclusive training. So I think what you mentioned, what you reflect is very much relevant and links and raises, of course, further questions for reflection. What could be done more to improve the situation or see other avenues of action? And then let me turn to Marcela, the last and not at all the least. From all that we have heard now together during the last 1.5 days while looking at the EU policy ambitions, we have heard from the Commission, the different initiatives zooming in the field of adult learning and then the regulatory and financial arrangements at different levels. What role would you see for public intervention in financing adult learning for now and in the future? What, from your perspective, from what you have heard, there has been a very big conference here recently of ESREA, a triennial conference that was a joy to participate. Also, from what has been also discussed there, what are the gaps that still need to be addressed and areas of improvement and overall topics that call most urgently for further research also for us? Marcela?
Thank you very much, Mantas. I would also like to start by thanking for the invitation and complimenting Cedefop for these 2 days, very intense, not only presentation of a lot of evidence from research, but also a lot of interesting debates. And it's always a bit difficult to speak as the last speaker, because then the panelists before me have already mentioned a lot of things that I would fully subscribe to. So let's try by answering your question to maybe add to this conversation. Well, first of all, I think for what we have experienced in these 2 days and for what we know, I mean, there's no doubt that public intervention is core. And yesterday, it was recalled that Europe wants to move from ambition to action. And I think that in the field of adult education and learning, I mean, we need to move from ambition to action if we want to reach that 60%. So for that, public intervention is core, and it's core at different levels. I think the first and important aspect to be reminded is that public intervention is core in order to establish enabling and regulatory frameworks which can function as policy levers or mechanism for change. In a way, the Council recommendation on the individual learning account work as that lever, otherwise we wouldn't be here, for example. But we have also heard from the different studies that were presented yesterday and this morning that in different countries there are different frameworks that have been established, revisited over time, or even abandoned when they fail to promote the kind of change towards the desired action or direction. So the question is that, I mean, for this enabling and regulatory framework to function as policy levers, there need to be a lot of negotiation. And I think this was also the point that was made from the panelists that spoke before me. So this negotiation should comprise at the minimum those partners that have been mentioned, the public powers, the public sectors, the social partners. And I think that the case of the Danish taximeter illustrated very well in this respect how this can be very productive. But yesterday, Diana Spiriton, she evoked a negotiation principle that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. And I would like to mimic this and for the future to suggest a different principle, which could sound like nothing is agreed until everybody has agreed. And I think that this is part of the issue that was coming out in the debates yesterday, and I think it's also included in the comment from the panelists that spoke before me. I mean, there are a lot of stakeholders that needs to play together. But in order to play together, they need to agree on the basic principles of this. And I think that's what I would like to see more in the future. Maybe in the future also extend to civil society providers that have only been partially included in this negotiation and consultation that have happened at in different countries from the experiences that we have learned about. But there is one issue here that I think hasn't been that I would have expected to be more central to the conversation, that is the final beneficiaries. I mean, what the recommendation called the European working age citizens, I think they have been a bit the elephant in this room. They have been mentioned as the target group, as the beneficiaries, but I haven't heard their voice in either their needs or their reason for being satisfied or unsatisfied with, for example, the different mechanisms that are already in place or in view of new mechanisms to be created in order to engage them in learning. And I will return on this when I go to discuss a little bit what I see as gaps in the research and need for the future. But I would like to stick to the issue of the public intervention, because so far I've only spoke about the enabling role that can have. While, of course, public intervention is also fundamental in terms of direct or indirect financing that can benefit the individuals, the employers, and I think that has also been made quite clear, I think, from yesterday across the different presentations, and not last in this panel. But I think it's important to restate or stress that either we speak of individual learning account or training leaves or training funds. I think from all the studies that have been presented yesterday and today, it is quite clear that none would have been possible without extensive investment from the public purse, either at the European, national, or regional, or better, in a combination at these three levels. Still, it has also been made clear, I believe, that it's fundamental but not sufficient. And therefore, for the future, it's important to consider how public funding can be increased. For the implementation of the individual learning account, this would be fundamental, for example, but also how other supporting mechanisms like training leaves, training funds can also complement public funding. And I think that today's study on training funds had made clear that in some countries more than others, for example, employers join in quite importantly in this respect. But it has also been mentioned somehow that that also individuals should engage in further training, not only by having all the costs covered, but somehow at some point someone is starting to say, well, when we speak about a plurality of funding, with public funding is the main, and then there is also private funding, for example, the employers should invest more, then there is also this issue, how much, to what extent should we ask the individuals that engage in training to also get in with some costs or funding. And here I think, I mean, from an adult education perspective, you could question whether it might also be helpful sometimes to engage, to have a direct cost, minor cost, as a symbolic element. But I think we also need to be very clear on who these beneficiaries are, and there are very different conditions. So I think we might consider that it's not necessarily bad to ask also individuals to contribute to a little extent, but then we need to be very clear who these individuals are, because they are in very different conditions. So they may be a worker, they may be able to do that, but there are certainly vulnerable groups that are even not in a condition. It's not just a matter of willing to, it's just, whether they can. So I think this sensitivity to the differential conditions is fundamental. But then I think for all this to happen, so to convince, a lot of people at different levels to put on money, then I think what I would like to see for the future is more reflection and debate on how do we make clear that the relevance for further training and skills acquired by individuals are really benefiting at the different level. The individuals, the organizations, for example, the employers, but also society at large. And I think that when debating this, for me, it's very important to question who will benefit from this and how and to what extent. And I think this was also bringing in this morning in the question, like, if I allow my employees to gain better skills, there will be then poaching from other enterprises, etc. So I think that a more open and clear debate on the benefit at the different level, I think it's fundamental to not only convince funding to be put in it, but also in terms of better engaging both employers and individuals in this enterprise. In this respect, I just want to mention that I personally find that the fact that the individual learning account are focused only on working age adults and only for work-related skills is limiting. But okay, let's start from here and then possibly expand. Then I just wanted to add a few more things. One, it's about that, for example, in workshop number 4 yesterday, while we were discussing the training leaves, one aspect that also emerged from the discussion, which I think is central, is that funding mechanisms always dedicate attention to the eligibility criteria in terms of who can benefit, so which kind of individuals, worker, unemployed, etc., to what scheme, etc. But I think that this is mostly a reflection based on individual characteristic of the imagined adult who should be trained. While one aspect that has received less attention in the debate, I think, which is important for the future, is more focus on the need to adapt any kind of scheme or mechanism to what are different working places, conditions, and needs. For example, if we have 2 unskilled employees that need the same kind of training, but they are in different jobs, maybe in one case, one may not need to be replaced when it's using working hours to be trained, while in other workplace, this would not be the case without a replacement. So how the different mechanisms work together, it's fundamental in this respect, and how flexible this interaction is or might be, it's also, I think, important for the future. Now, because time is limited, let me also say something about the issue about research. What are the gaps and future call for research? I think that both Mario and Raffaella had already mentioned a few aspects, and others were also mentioned. Mantas, yesterday you were also bringing, for example, the focus on the more research on the arrangement for the training of employees in the public sector. And one of the rapporteur was also mentioning more research in order to forecasting exercises to calculate the amount of financial investment that would be needed, for example, to launch new schemes or mechanisms. So to this, I would like to add a few more, and one is to return to what I said was the elephant in the room. I mean, we need to give voice to the adults in working age that are expected to benefit from either individual learning account or any other kind of scheme. And for this, I think it is important to understand better. I would see 2 lines of research here. One is about all those individuals that have been engaged with mechanisms that are in place. We know that there are many. These were presented yesterday and this morning. And the question is, how all those individuals that benefited from any of the schemes or the French CPF or other mechanism, have they got better job satisfaction? Have they got an increase in salary? Have they got a new job? Or maybe they haven't got anything of this, but maybe they have got any other benefit. I think this is fundamental in order also to view what is possible for the future. But we could say the same for the employers that have been engaged in providing training leaves for their employees, for example. Have they ameliorated their overall performance? And when I speak of overall performance, I'm not only thinking of whether a better performance is the result of just a higher skilled employee, but it could also engage with if an employee is happier, is also creating a different atmosphere, is maybe not willing to leave that employer for another one, even if poached, etc. So I think we need to hear more the voice of the people engaged in this. And this line of research is also in need for understanding better the barriers. So in those places where mechanisms exist, why those that are potentially eligible do not use them? What are the barriers? And I mean, on barriers, given that, Manta, you mentioned the conference in Prague, I mean, we know that there is already quite an extensive research on barriers, but we also know, and I think this was made the case in Prague, that sometimes barriers now are a bit looked in a more traditional fashion way that doesn't really tell the entire story. So we need to understand better, for example, what is behind the lack of time or the lack of money are the two that are really hiding many different stories, and we need to understand better those. So to move to a conclusion, my colleagues here at the table have mentioned more research, more data, more qualitative research. I would say that we also need more use of available data. Because I think that secondary analysis of available data is not exploited as much as that could be. But also, I believe that we need more research on negative cases. Yesterday we heard the Netherlands case, but also UK 20, 25 years ago, they had a scheme that was abandoned. I think we need to know more from negative cases also to learn, not only from a positive one. And I conclude here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcela, and indeed, I think many of these interventions reflect very much on the question of why we do this, and then really looking into how to achieve the why, discussing with the different stakeholders at the table. So thank you very much. I know that there are some of you who are already very much looking, waiting for your bus to the airport, and because we're a few minutes late, I think you need to start catching the bus because the bus is waiting you. So for those who have to go to the airport with our shuttle, because of the time, I think you need to go to the bus. It's waiting for you. And while you move, I think we can thank again the panelists very much for their interventions once more. And I would like then to invite Maria Brugge to the table here for her closing remarks. Wait a minute, maybe. We are
sure.
later. I want to give the interventions.
Absolutely.
I think some 15 people. We need to catch the bus.
Yes.
A lot of time for lunch, but there is an airplane, I think, at 2:30 or something like that. Yeah. And there are many of them catching it. So
doesn't matter.
That was the arrangement. So for those who don't rush out and who don't hurry and who will be happily enjoying also, I hope, the lunch and further discussions following this very rich 1.5 days and very rich exchange just now, for very much closing remarks and taking stock of everything that has been heard from more Cedefop perspective, I would now like to give the floor to Mara Brugge, the Deputy Director of Cedefop, to say some concluding reflections on what we have been discussing until now. So Mara, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mantas. Good morning, everyone. So we are reaching the concluding session of our conference. And first of all, I would like to thank you all for your commitment and for the expertise that you brought to this forum. And by concluding this conference, I would like to share with you a couple of reflections and start by reaffirming what I call a simple truth that underpins all our discussions. The first simple truth, but of course a very important truth in its simplicity, so to say in inverted commas, is that investing in adult learning pays off, because we do know that successful continuing that and adult learning systems can really contribute very directly to strengthening the economic competitiveness, the environmental sustainability, and also social cohesion. And there is also no doubt that the benefits of adult learning are widespread and are shared by the individual, by their employers, both current and future employers, and by society at large. And I would say that the second simple truth is that we know for sure that the potential demand for adult learning is expanding very rapidly, because the demands in the labor market are changing quickly, not least because of the digital and green transitions, and this requires adults to continuously update their skills throughout their working lives. And this, of course, poses an extraordinary challenge to our education and training system. So therefore, a fundamental issue is, for sure, investing more. But, and this is a challenge, of course, considering that public spending on adult learning, as you know, remains comparatively low in the majority of member states. But the challenge is not only or not simply to secure additional resources. An equally important challenge is how to spend these resources more effectively. How to build systems that work, what kind of training we are financing, for the benefits of whom, and most importantly, the how. And this is why, indeed, our discussions yesterday and today focused strongly on the how of financing adult learning. So what policies, what incentives, what governance arrangements are necessary to make lifelong learning accessible, attractive, and effective. So we need a lot of work still to understand this. More specifically, yesterday and today, we have discussed two very powerful instruments, two distinct approaches to financing adult learning: training funds and individual learning accounts. Both are no doubt very important policy tools in the adult learning ecosystems across EU member states, but they are important for very different reasons, because training funds, as we know, are collective arrangements which are often established based on mandatory employer contributions that aim to mutualize, I would say, training costs and incentivize employer engagement in training, while individual learning accounts are demand-side instruments, ideally functioning as an unconditional individual entitlement. So the core difference between the two lies on whether the instrument focuses on supporting the individual demand for learning or on the employer-side provision of training. And of course, the two instruments are very different in terms of primary purpose, in terms of beneficiary, but in my view, they have two fundamental aspects in common in their diversity. The first fundamental aspect they have in common is that to be effective, both approaches must be embedded into what we call enabling framework. What does it mean? It means that the effectiveness of both instruments, individual learning accounts and training funds, fundamentally depends on the complementary institutional support, which includes key actions like guidance, like validation of non-formal learning, quality assurance, as we said, or paid training leave. And the second crucial commonality among the two instruments is the crucial role of social partners and governance, because both instruments involve actively the participation and negotiation among stakeholders, particularly social partners, in their design and governance structures. So even if in different forms, stakeholder cooperation, stakeholder consultation are really key essential elements for both instruments, because at the end of the day, when they are implemented, both individual learning accounts and training funds must, first of all, interact, but also fit into the already existing, and I would like to underline, quite complex structure of a country's continuing vet and adult learning system. And as our discussions have shown, both instruments have great potential, but also face their own challenges. For example, if we take the case of individual learning accounts, I see two main challenges. The first challenges would be the need for increased, substantial and sustainable public fund. And the second challenge for the individual learning accounts is the complexity of integrating them within existing systems. So this is a challenge which it will take a bit of time to overcome. While in the case of training fund, which have a more consolidated experience compared to individual learning accounts, for training funds, the major challenge remains, I would say, the systemic difficulty in reaching micro-enterprises and small enterprises. So these are just very few reflections based on our discussions yesterday and today, but also based on the work that we have been doing throughout our projects on financing continuing vet and adult learning. And needless to say, all of our work would have not been possible without your contributions, without all those of you who have supported us throughout our projects with your feedback, with your ideas, with your critical remarks. We are really grateful for your valuable contributions. And now, of course, we will take stock of what we have learned throughout our projects, but also of what we have learned during our discussions with you yesterday and today. And we will continue our work, because the challenges faced by Europe are not going away. They will remain. And continuing vet and adult learning will remain key areas of policy to help our society to respond to the challenges they face. So there is still a lot of work to be done. And it is our commitment at Cedefop that through our research work and with your help, we will continue to contribute to address these challenges. So we will further strengthen our efforts to build the bridge, let's say, between the vision, between the ambition to the full achievement of the right to quality and inclusive training, education and lifelong learning as proclaimed by the European Pillar of Social Rights. But to reach it, I mean, we are still very, very, very far away. But before closing this event, please allow me to thank our speakers, our panelists, our moderators, our colleagues from the European Parliament, the Council, the Commission, from national governments, from the social partners, researchers, learning providers, all of you, because your contributions have been really invaluable for us. But please allow me to address special thanks to my colleagues at Cedefop, to the team who made this event successful, at least in my view, and I hope that you will share my views, both content-wise but also from an organizational point of view. So please join me in thanking and congratulating Mantas, Patrizia, Maria, whom I don't see. I don't see Maria, but thank you, Maria. Dialecti. And Cristina. Under, of course, the strategic leadership of Antonio Ranieri, the head of department, who is also not in the room, but bravo Antonio as well. So thank you all again, and I wish you a safe travel back, and let's keep in touch. Bye-bye.
Thank you much, Mara, for your remarks. And before you leave, I have a very important and not technical at all request, the evaluation form. I'll show you in a second, if I find it, the evaluation QR code. And I would very much ask you for 1 or 2 minutes to scan it and to respond to the few questions behind it, so that we know what you feel, what we could still improve, what went well, and in general, if you have any other comments or feedback, or thank you even, we would be very appreciate your few minutes of evaluation. Thank you.
Bravo, Mantas. Well.
And then finally, the lunch is outside. As mentioned before, we have buses leaving at 2:30 back to the city for those who would like to, which includes also a city tour. And a very small request, if you could leave your badges before you leave, so we could reuse at least some of them for future events, we would be very grateful. Of course, unless you really need a souvenir to remember the good memories of the conference, then I understand. Thank you, good luck, enjoy lunch. Thank you for coming, and have a good trip back. Looking forward to see you again, hopefully in the future. Bye.
Thank you.